3.5 years or so, and then began my own business. Well, I had been working on the side with my own business, but went full-time at my own business and absolutely loved it. But I suppose there was always something there that kind of niggled at me, something under the surface, and I wasn't too sure what it was. But life was missing something. Something was lacking from life. I believe that we are being constantly guided by God. Hello, my name is Father Dominic Meehan. I'm a priest in the Diocese of Vocation and Emly, serving here in the parishes of Templemore, Clonmore and Clay, and since September of 2021 also parish priest in Loughmore and Castleiney. I originally come from a town in County Leitrim called Drumshanbo, where I was reared. I was born in the UK, where my parents had emigrated there looking for work in the 1950s, like so many generations of people from the west of Ireland. My childhood was a relatively happy childhood. We had our struggles and our difficulties, like every family. I remember growing up wanting to be a member of the Walton family because I thought that they were perfect. And as life developed, I then realised that perhaps the Waltons might have been the dysfunctional ones. Our summers were filled with swimming at the local outdoor swimming pool. My parents ran a business, a bar and a bed and breakfast stroke hotel, and a dining room stroke restaurant. It was a very busy household, so from a very early age we were helped out in the bar, in the kitchen, learned to cook and learned to make beds. It was a great education for later life. Learning those trades that we used always wherever we went, whether it be in college or travelling for the sake of adventure. My family was a very devout family. I was the youngest of 6, 1 brother and 4 sisters. My parents, both my mother and father, were devout Catholics. They practiced regularly. My mother was a daily mass goer. And that rubbed off on all of us, although the older children, I suppose, from time to time, like all teenagers, rebelled. I can remember the Sunday morning arguments in the house after a late night dancing for the older ones, and my mother roaring through the house, "As long as you live under my roof, you're going to go to Mass." But it was a good training, I think, for life in general. I think that our faith is so important to us. At the age of 8, I began to serve Mass in the local Poor Clare convent, an enclosed order that had been there since 1863. It was always a great privilege and an honour to serve Mass, even from that very early age. Although I never, I suppose, fully understood why it was a privilege or why it was an honour for me. I remember some of the older ladies would often say, "You'd make a lovely priest," and maybe pinch my chin or my cheek. And it was something that I didn't like hearing. It never really sat well with me. Perhaps I thought that it wasn't a normal way of life, although back in the late 70s and 80s, a priesthood was quite normal. There were an abundance of vocations. It was something that was thought about. It was an option for young men to consider, not like today. I was never a lover of school. I was always late for school. I never had my homework done, so I suppose I was always in trouble. I always enjoyed the adventure of life around school. I didn't enjoy it. So then when it came time for secondary school, my parents sent me to St. Mael's College in Longford as a boarder. I can remember my first year being very, very homesick. And then years 2 to 4, I began to find my place and enjoy it a little bit more. And then in year 5, which was our Leaving Cert year, back in the late 80s, early 90s, I enjoyed my time at St. Mael's College so much that I actually forgot to do any work. St. Mael's was what was known as a junior seminary for the Diocese of Ardagh-Clonmacnoise. So it wasn't unusual that we would have often heard people speak about priesthood and religious life. We would have had very faith-based retreat days where teams would have come in, and it wasn't so uncommon or so foreign or alien to hear people speak about faith, even though perhaps we didn't really understand it. I decided to go to New York, and I did various different jobs. I worked as a furniture removal man. I even worked one day as a ticket tout. But I eventually found a job in a pub, and I worked there. It was someplace where I could use the skills that I had learnt at home as a child. But I can remember one evening coming home from work. I used to live with my sister and her family in Staten Island. So I'd get the ferry or the bus to work in the morning. I worked in Manhattan on 38th Street and 10th Avenue. And during that time, the crack cocaine epidemic had torn through the city. And it was a rough area. It was a red light district. And it was an area that I was afraid of, and it was an area that saddened me. Perhaps these young women and men who had come to New York City with similar aspirations to myself, and things had not gone well. But I remember one evening, one Sunday evening when I was on my way home from work, and I discovered a little Franciscan church on the corner of Madison Square Garden above Penn Street Station. And I remember going up and opening this large, heavy door, and the door closing gently behind me. And then just silence. It was like as if somebody had pressed the pause button on the mad soundtrack that was Midtown Manhattan. Everything was silent, and I felt like I was being cradled by someone loving. And it's a feeling that has never left me. And wherever I have gone, the first thing I've always done is I've sought out the church, because it has always been for me a place of peace and a place of safety and a place of love. That was probably my first real, tangible experience of God's presence in my life. I'm sure there were others, but it's the first time that I really took notice. I suppose when I think about vocation and call, I'm reminded of those two beautiful stories from the first book of Kings and also from 1 Samuel, where Samuel is being called he thinks he's being called by his master, but he's being called by God. And I think that for me and for many people, even today, because God still continues to call, but I think for me at the time, like Samuel, I was confusing God's call for someone else's call. Perhaps the world was too busy and too noisy, and that I needed a place of hush. And then the beautiful story from the book of Kings, where the character goes into the cave on the side of the mountain. He's been told to go there to meet God. And there's the violent storm, but God isn't in the storm. There's the crashing of rocks, but God isn't in the crashing of rocks. There's the thunder and the lightning and the rain, but God isn't there. But God is in the gentle breeze. And that's how God calls, in the gentle breeze. So after a year, I decided that I had enough of New York and America, and I returned home to the family business. And I realized that I probably had to do something with my life. So I ended up going to England and to Southampton, where my sister was studying dental technology. And I began to study dental technology. And I loved the course. And after 2 years, I moved to Cardiff and I completed my diploma in Cardiff. And I got a job in the local dental hospital. And after a year or so, I applied for a job in the Royal London Hospital in London, in Whitechapel. And I was successful. I worked there for 4 years. So after about 4 years working in London, I decided that I would return home to Ireland. And I got a job in St. James's Hospital and also started my own business on the side. So I worked in St. James's for about 3.5 years or so, and then began my own business. Well, I had been working on the side with my own business, but went full-time at my own business and absolutely loved it. I think over the course of 4 years, perhaps I could count on one hand the number of times that I felt like I was going to work. But I suppose there was always something there that kind of niggled at me, something under the surface. And I wasn't too sure what it was. But life was missing something. Something was lacking from life. But one day I phoned my friend Michael and I just blurted out that I had been thinking again about priesthood and vocation. And my friend Michael said to me, well, he said, it could be something or it could be nothing. And that kind of became my mantra. So I began to explore the idea of vocation for the Diocese of Cashel and Emly, because that's where I lived and that's where my family were. It was a long process, probably over a year of trying to contact people, and also a year of meeting a spiritual director and discerning what priesthood would mean for me and why I would want priesthood. And I suppose if I think about it now, I would probably have to say that priesthood maybe chose me. The idea of calling again, part of the selection process or interview process for the priesthood at the time, as it still is now, is a psychological assessment which was carried out over a number of days in Dublin. And I can remember on the day of the results, I can remember the psychologist turned to me and said that the good news was that I wasn't sick, but that there were weaknesses. And isn't that really all of us? That, you know, that we're all in some way broken vessels, but we are still loved. So everything was settled. I was accepted to study for the Diocese of Cashel and Emly. It really wasn't an easy decision to leave my job because it was something that I loved. And I was making a good living. I don't think I was ever going to be materially rich, but I was happy and I was content, and my life had great meaning. But I suppose I felt that, in the words of my friend Michael, that it could be something or nothing, and that this was something that I really had to try. I really had to give it a go. So back in August of 2005, on a Friday and a Saturday night, my brother came down from Dundalk and helped me to clean up the laboratory where I was renting and cleared everything out. And on the Sunday morning, with my sister Jane, my mother Fidelma, and my niece Maeve, we drove to Maynooth where I would begin my studies for the priesthood. So my decision to enter a seminary was, it was a difficult enough decision. I was very nervous. I didn't know whether I was doing the right thing. I often use the analogy myself that I didn't know whether I was running towards something or running away from something. I didn't know how my family and friends would take the news that I was giving up what I had to go and study for the priesthood. I enjoyed seminary. The second year was a year of pastoral studies where we spent some time 2 days a week in Maynooth at lectures, and then the rest of the time we spent in parishes. I never take a vocation and I never take priesthood for granted. We are here to serve. We are here to serve the people of God. So when my classmates were being ordained deacons and they were getting ready for ordination to priesthood, I was in a type of a limbo. I didn't know what was going to happen. I left Maynooth in May of 2012, and between my bishop, Dr. Dermot at the time, who was very, very good to me, we decided that I would go and I would spend some time in the parish of Dunboyne as a lay pastoral worker. I spent about 8 months there, and it was a wonderful time. The parish priest at the time in Dunboyne was Father Dermot O'Farrell, who is now Archbishop of the Diocese of Dublin, and he was very good to me. And I learned quite a lot from him and also from Father Mark, who was the curate in the parish at the time. I was introduced to school chaplaincy, but the time was unsettling, and I used that time to learn. I used my time in supervision. That's where you meet with a supervisor on a one-to-one, and you talk about your work as a pastoral worker. And again, it's a very self-searching thing. Also, I had a wonderful time with spiritual direction and learning, learning about God and the love that God has for me, and I suppose more importantly, that gift that vocation is. And again, I realized that this was something that I was not entitled to, that ultimately it would be a gift if I was to be ordained a priest. And then in April 2013, my bishop, Dr. Dermot Clifford, phoned me and just said that he had been speaking with Father Dermot, and that everything was good. I could start to prepare for ordination to diaconate, which happened in Maynooth on the bank holiday weekend, the last bank holiday weekend of May. And within about 2 weeks, I was installed as a deacon here in the parish of Templemore in my home diocese for Cashel and Lemley. And I'm here since. My ordination was scheduled for the Feast of Christ the King on the 24th of November 2013, and it was the last day of the year of faith. I believe that we are being constantly guided by God. For some people, they don't identify God. They perhaps identify a higher being, or something other than themselves. But it is God. Whatever we decide to call it, it is God at work in our lives, despite ourselves. The ordination day was a day of beauty. And I think that the past experience, the 2 previous years that had been a great struggle for me and a worry and a very anxious time, they prepared me so well for my ordination, because I can remember standing before the bishop, being called to the sanctuary area, being called to the steps of the cathedral, and I can remember lying prostrate and just feeling so comfortable and so at home in that very action and in what I was doing and what I was about to do. So I've been in the parish of Templemore, Clonmore and Calais since being ordained as deacon back in June of 2013. So I suppose I have the unique distinction of that I'm a curate here in this parish, but as of September of 2021, I was appointed as a parish priest in a neighbouring parish. Our church, our faith, does not want to add to that difficulty, but wants to kind of ensure people that God is always there. But again, we live in an experiential society whereby unless I can experience something and touch something, well then, is it really worthy of my time and my effort? And when it comes to God, the answer is yes.
Problems, worries, sadness. Are you seeking solutions?
Bible says,
Do not be anxious about anything. Instead, pray about everything. Choose faith over fear.